This is going to be a spoiler-free review for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse for about the first 5 to 10 minutes of this. Then it's all spoilers. I'm not holding back. I'm going full spoiler details on this movie. But let's just start with what Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is about. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse starts off basically where the last movie left off. We follow Miles Morales as he's now been Spider-Man for a few months. I think it's about a year since Into the Spider-Verse happened. And he is struggling with it because he doesn't have his friends anymore. He's pretty much a loner. He's a little disconnected with the family. They can't understand who he is because they don't understand that he's Spider-Man, and he's afraid to tell them that he's Spider-Man. And apart from that, the only people that would understand are in different multiverses slash dimensions. And he's struggling with that. He ends up getting involved in this basically multiversal chase that involves the characters of Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, and it involves some people from his past, including Spider-Gwen, played by Haley Steinfeld. And there's this moment where Spider-Gwen comes to whatever galaxy slash universe that Spider-Man is a part of, Miles Morales, this Miles Morales that we know. And basically, after a confluence of events, they end up together. They end up together in this multiverse, and they're now kind of trapped, and Spider-Man is discovering his place in the multiverse and how it exists. Meanwhile, he's attacked by this villain named the Spot, who has this really interesting history with his past, and the Spot basically threatens to destroy the inner workings of the multiverse as we understand it to be in this movie. That's a really complicated over description of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Really, all you need to know is this movie is about Spider-Man growing and learning what it means to be Spider-Man and what that requires of a human being and struggling to relate to people. It's a very personal story focused around Miles Morales again. And what I like that this movie does so smartly is in focusing on Miles Morales. Of course, you get the typical just fun that we had from the first Into the Spider-Verse movie. You get the humor that is just bursting through the screen. I mean, this is Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who've worked on the Lego movies, 21 and 22 Jump Street, Mitchell and the Machines. They know how to do comedy, and they know how to do it very effectively. And this movie is very funny. In fact, it's like insanely funny. There's a lot of just good visual gags. There's a lot of meta in jokes in this movie. There's some great addition of comedic characters, including one of my favorites, which is Spider-Man, Punk Spider-Man, I believe is actually what he's called, voiced expertly by Daniel Kaluuya, who is just laugh out loud riot throughout. Andy Samberg voices a character, Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, who is just used to expert effects in this movie. And this movie, like I said, this movie's very funny throughout. And it still has that same kind of irreverent humor that the first Into the Spider-Verse has. But this film is significantly darker than Into the Spider-Verse. And the story is far more serious, but not in a way that feels serious for serious sake. This movie earns its darkness, and it earns it very well. What I liked about this movie is it takes its time. This is a movie that has been advertised as having 200 plus Spider-Man, and it does. But that could have been the gimmick of this movie. The focus of this movie is still Spider-Man in Miles Morales, and specifically Gwen Stacy. And I think Gwen Stacy is actually a really interesting character to dive into in this movie because she is the reason this movie works for a majority of its runtime. Haley Steinfeld voices Gwen Stacy in this version, as she did so in Into the Spider-Verse as well. And what they do so well with the character of Gwen Stacy is they give her an arc. She is, without spoiling much, she is the character that they really focus on. They give her a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you know anything about the Gwen Stacy storyline, it very heavily involves her father, Captain Stacy. And what I love about it, and I'm trying again not to go into too many spoilers right off the bat, but Across the Spider-Verse starts with Gwen Stacy, and we follow this 10 to 15 minute sequence of Gwen Stacy basically being brought into this Spider-Verse league that protects the multiverse. And it's a very heartfelt story. I found myself thinking this is the first movie done expertly in 10 minutes. And that doesn't negate what Into the Spider-Verse does. It's just so impressive how much story they are able to pack in to 15 minutes and you fully understand everything that is going on. The animation in this film is exceptional. And specifically, when we start with this Gwen Stacy animation, they use watercolors to just amazing effects. Uh, every iteration of Spider-Man has its own art style, movement, and color palette. And then for the case of Gwen Stacy, it's very watery. It's a very watercolor based. And so you get to really feel the emotions and atmosphere of this movie come through the colors. And it's just something so beautiful to behold. And I was just left so visually stunned by this. And this is the first 10 minutes of the movie, and the movie only gets better from here. And it brings you right back into this world and it sets the tone, it sets the stakes. But in focusing this film a little bit more on Gwen Stacy, it allows how this film's to play out. It allows it to feel satisfying because without saying too much, this film is a part one of part two. And I hope that is not spoiling anything for you. They advertised it originally as Across the Spider-Verse part one and then part two until they changed the sequel title to Beyond the Spider-Verse. But for all intensive purposes, this movie is the beginning of something. And I left a little just like going into this movie. I shouldn't say I left. Going into this movie, I had mixed feelings about this movie. I love the singularity focus of the first film, that is a complete story. And I was a little worried, how are you going to do a part one and part two without the story feeling stretched? At the end of this movie, I never felt that the story was stretched. I thought this movie was handled pretty perfectly in its just timing and its pacing. And by the end, all I wanted to do is when the movie ended, I wanted to walk into Beyond the Spider-Verse right away. And I think that's a testament to this movie's quality. This movie works because Sony just trusted their filmmakers. This movie goes crazy. This movie goes crazy hard. It is throwing references left and right. It is fast paced, but it never feels convoluted or confusing. You are in this kinetic energy ride from beginning to end. And I loved everything about it. The new additions of this movie are really good. Spider-Man Punk, played by Daniel Kaluuya, as I mentioned, is really just exceptional. Jason Schwartzman deserves a lot of love for the villain, The Spot, who's really the primary antagonist of this film. He goes from a little goofy because his character is inherently a little dumb sounding to just full on intimidating as the second half of the film rolls on. Oscar Isaac is just Oscar Isaac, and he's just so incredible in this film. I mean, just truly menacing in a way that I found so enjoyable. And everyone else in this film really gets a moment to shine. Shamik Moore as Miles Morales continues to be really just great in this role. Haley Steinfeld, as I already mentioned, Brian Tyree Henry, who plays Jefferson Morales, who, again, I thought was just exceptional in the first film. He gets a little bit more to do, but really the focus of this film goes actually to Jefferson Davis's, it's now Jefferson Morales's, his wife, who I'm trying to find the name of the actress, Luna Lauren Velez, who plays Rio Morales. She is exceptional in this movie. There's that one moment in Into the Spider-Verse where Jefferson Morales has this conversation with Miles where he's telling him, "You're the best of us. I see the spark in you." And in this scene, she gets the mother talk to Miles, and it is so heart-wrenchingly beautiful. I found myself tearing up heavily. It's one of my favorite scenes. It's so beautifully animated and it's so perfectly brought to life. And it's what makes this movie special, is the dynamics of these characters. It's not the multiversal storytelling, even though that is done exceptional. It is truly just sitting here with these characters and feeling empathy, feeling the emotions, feeling the Miles Morales storyline come to life. I just really loved it all, and it really worked for me in an exceptional way. Some other new additions are Issa Rae as Jessica Drew slash Spider Woman, who I thought was very good, though a little underserved in this movie. She kind of gets reduced down to the mentor who's kind of always scolding Spider Gwen. And Karen Suni, who is, I don't want to fully reveal who Karen Suni is. He, for those who do not know the actor, he plays Dopender in the Deadpool movies. He comes in for a really fun role in this movie. Shea Wiggum plays George Stacy in this movie to really good effects. Like I said, this movie is just really exceptional. The color work in this movie, you could take any shot of this movie and frame it, and it'd be absolutely beautiful. It's incredible to study. There's this scene really early on involving a classic Spider-Man villain where he comes in from a different dimension, and you instantly just are aware of what they're about to do and the art style that they're approaching it with. And you're just like, oh my God, they're blending like 50 different art styles all into this one movie. And it never feels loud. It just feels impressive to watch. I really just was swept away by this movie. And I'm about to go into the spoiler review for this, but to just put a cap to my spoiler free review, I just want to say this movie's exceptional. I love this movie. The second time watching this movie, I found it even more rewarding. You notice so much more. The second time, I really was just focusing in on the color, the backgrounds, just so much life that is brought to screen through the colors, the atmosphere, and it just brings so much to the emotional arcs of these characters, and it does so much of the heavy lifting without being in your face. I really, really love this movie. I listen, Into the Spider-Verse is my number one film of the 2010s decade. I don't know if I can get Beyond the Spider-Verse the higher rating than this. To be honest, they're both 5-star reviews. Both of these movies are getting the 5 stars. I don't know if I prefer Beyond the Spider-Verse over Into the Spider-Verse, but the fact that it is living up to the expectations that the first film set and in some ways exceeds it, I'm just absolutely thrilled. The first time watching it, I was like a little struggling with some of the pacing and some of the character motivations and some of the lack of emotional arc. And I also didn't find the comedy to be necessarily as enriching as it was in the first movie. Second viewing, I had none of those issues. I think all those issues were actually really well sorted out in the second time viewing, and you catch so much more. You just catch so many of the little jokes that just, it's a joke a minute. And if a joke doesn't hit, another joke hits exceptionally. Really love this movie. It's getting the 5-star review from me.